it's almost as if he glosses over the troubles that we face. I think of Job. I come back to Job in my thinking time and time and time again, because it's just a fascinating and wonderful story. But even in the life of Job, you go through all the chapters of Job losing his family and losing all of his possessions and losing his health. And Job just gets to the bottom. And all of his friends, his wonderful friends, come and say, Job, you must have done something really wrong, and God's angry at you. Just tell God you're sorry, and maybe he might forgive you and give you some of the stuff back that you lost. Job eventually gets to a point where he does begin to question God. I mean, wouldn't you? He lost 10 children. He lost all of his possessions. He doesn't have any money anymore. He was once the richest man in the East. Now he is the poorest. And he lost his health. I know we're all spiritual giants here, and we would never question God, but I mean, really, there comes a point where you're like, okay, what is going on? Why are these bad things happening to me if I am such a good person? And so Job, throughout all the chapters of Job, maintains his innocence. Not that he was perfect, but that he did not do anything wrong to deserve this necessarily. And you get to the end of Job, and just it fascinates me how God replies to Job. Job gets to a point where he starts questioning why God did this, and that it's not really fair. And the interesting thing to me, I mean, it just blows me away every time I read through it. God's response to Job never answers his question as to why. God never says, Job, by the way, this is why I did this. God's response to Job is, this is who I am. I am the creator. I'm the one that formed the earth. I'm the one that prepares all the... I am God. He never particularly answers Job's issue. He never just comforts him and says, okay, this is why these things are happening. God does the same thing with Elijah. Elijah gets upset after he has slain all the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, and he finds out that Jezebel said that she is going to kill him. Elijah flees. He runs as far away and as fast as he can to get away for his life. And God comes to him and says, Elijah, what are you doing here? Why did you flee? Elijah starts complaining. I'm the only one serving you, God. And you know what's interesting? God never answers his question as to why these things are happening. He simply says, you need to serve me. You don't worry about everybody else. You worry about you. It's interesting that in these troubles, in Jeremiah's troubles, we've seen it a number of times, having moved through the book of Jeremiah up to this point. We've seen it a number of times when Jeremiah is just in the throes of despair for all the troubles that he's facing. And God never one time says, you know what, let me take a step back. Sorry about that. You know, let me explain everything to you. Let me tell you why you're going through these troubles. He glosses over it in many cases. Now, why does God do that? Understand, it's not because he's uncaring towards our struggles. The Bible very clearly says that the Lord, that Jesus, is touched with a feeling of our infirmities. But it's for this reason, and this is the main crux of this message. Life is more about God's overarching plan for his own glory than my comfort or happiness. Sometimes we need to take a step back and realize that truth. Life is more about God's overarching plan for his glory to bring him pleasure than it is my comfort or happiness. And that is a hard truth to swallow. It really is. That life is much more about bringing God glory than it is about making me happy. And as Christians, that's where we wrestle. That's where we really struggle, because we want to be happy, don't we? No one is foolish enough to say, you know, I love misery. Now, some people do love misery because it brings them some kind of pleasure, but the vast majority of us would say, I want to be happy. I want a good life. I want all the blessings, the physical blessings that God can bestow upon me. I want things to be good in my family. I want all of my finances in order. I want peace of mind. I want all of these good things. But sometimes we need to take a step back and realize that God's overarching plan, as he seeks to get glory for himself, that is number one on his priority list. And our happiness, although he will bestow it upon us, is not number one on his list. And sometimes we get that a little bit confused. We face trials and sometimes feel that God owes us an explanation. But there's a point in our lives that we must come to, that we come and make a decision that either I will submit my perspective of right and wrong, and I will submit my perspective of what God owes to me, and recognize that God has a right to do as He pleases, or if I don't do that, I will constantly struggle with why God would allow this or He would do this in my life. And most of us, very honestly, live with the second mindset. We constantly struggle with why God does things in our lives, why this trial came into my life, and why this happened or that happened. We constantly struggle, and even if we live in the first mindset, that we submit our perspective to God, and whatever happens in our lives, whether we consider it good, bad, or otherwise, we submit that to God and His sovereignty. Even when we do that, we're tempted to fall back into the second mindset of asking God, why does this happen, and what is going on in my life? It's interesting to note what God says to Jeremiah while he's in prison. What is most perplexing in God's statement to Jeremiah is that He doesn't answer the situation Jeremiah is facing, but rather He describes Himself. Again, look at verse number 2. Thus saith the Lord, the maker thereof, the Lord that formed it to establish it, the Lord is His name. The logical question is, the maker of what? It says the Lord, the maker thereof, and there's a lot of different debate about what this could mean. It could be a reference to God being the maker of the earth. Could be a reference to God saying, I made the prison that you're in. It could be a reference to the Lord, the maker of Jerusalem. That's mentioned a little bit earlier and also later in the passage. It could be translated as the Lord, the doer of it, the one who is accomplishing His will. I would lean to that verse, the maker thereof, referring to God being the creator of all, the creator of the universe, the creator of the world. That is, He formed all things. You see it in verse number 2. The Lord that formed it to establish it, the Lord is His name. He formed all things. He established all things. Jehovah, Yahweh, the self-existing one, is His name. And that is important to realize where Jeremiah is and then what God is about to say. Because again, it would be tempting if you were in prison and God comes and speaks to you. It would be tempting just to hear God say, okay, here's the plan. I'm going to get you out of here. Everything's going to be okay. But instead, God simply says, this is who I am. I am God. I am the one who made everything you see. I made the prison that surrounds you. I formed all these things. I established them. I am in control. If you were in prison listening to God's words, wouldn't you question, is God in control? But what comfort in the midst of trials to consider verse 2, that God is the creator and He is in control. No matter what you are facing right now, whether it be financial or emotional or spiritual, that does not change the fact that God is the creator and He is in control. You know, there have been times in my life when things really felt like they were spiraling out of control. Have you ever been there? I mean, you just look at things and you're like, man, could things get any worse? And then they do. And then you start wondering, where is this going to end? Where's the bottom? When's it going to bottom out? When am I going to hit the rock bottom? You know, there are times in life when things just seem like they're spiraling out of control. And that's when we need to consider that God is the one who is in control. That He is the one who is the creator of all things. That He has not let anything slip through His fingers. That there is nothing that happens in my life that He has not approved, that He has not said, this will be for their good and for my glory. That is God's overarching plan for us to take a step back and recognize that He is still God in the midst of sorrow and in the midst of trials. And in the light of verse 2, it's encouraging to hear verse 3. That God desires in the midst of our trials for us to call upon Him, to look to Him, and to know that He will answer. Verse 3, He says, call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not. He says, I will answer it in a way that you cannot believe. I will answer and show you these great and these mighty things which you would not even believe, though it would be told you. God longs for us to call upon Him, and He promises He will answer. It's much like the last message that we looked at in Jeremiah.